It was a bird at Bergen-Belsen that did it, that wet May morning in 1985, when Ronald Reagan stepped out of the Documentum House, his face racked by what he had just seen. Precisely then, as he glanced over the mass graves toward the monument where he would speak, a skylark sang out. I felt my heart constrict. Something about the way he looked against the grey sky, and the way the birds sounded through the detached medium of my television set, made me wish passionately I was there. I knew then what I could not have believed 2.5 years before at Senator Hatfield's house. Reagan, I thought, stood within reach of presidential greatness. Time and again he had struggled against circumstance and bent it to his will. But for his strange reluctance to take credit, he might already be considered great on the achievements of his first term alone. An overnight resurgence of American positivism, a rethinking of the acquired attitudes to the government as provider, an assertion of popular rights on the federal shop floor and on the federal bench, a declaration of moral war upon the Soviet Union, plus clear intent to bankrupt it by sheer force of military spending, a rebalancing of executive power against the legislative, and of private initiative against public monopoly, a transferal of compassion from the sphere of welfare to that of the womb, and an almost chivalrous display of valour after losing half his blood supply on March 30th, 1981. History admires the wise, but it canonizes the brave. Greatness, however, requires that the leaders who change their times be seen to change themselves, or at least to embody great ideals. Abraham Lincoln not only suffered for the Union as much as any Union soldier, he embodied in his nature the antagonisms and interdependences of North and South. Franklin Roosevelt's triumph over adversity was both personal and political. To my mind, Reagan did not have this epic dimension. From conversations with him and former aides, many of them disillusioned cast-offs, I knew that his life story was as interesting and as prototypically American as Lincoln's or FDR's. But there was a slabby quality to his character, as of alabaster. I could see the walls and crystals beneath the gloss without being able to probe them. Not until Reagan confronted the green barrows of Bergen-Belsen and realized what dread fertilizer enriched their covering of heather, did the alabaster become flesh, and terror and pity, the emotions that Hazlitt says are concomitant with tragedy, stir in my breast. I felt afraid of the passions that he would unleash by going on from there to Bitburg, and despaired of his naive assumption that after 40 years he could reconcile the Holocaust's killers and its slain. He was deaf to the skylark, but it irresistibly summoned me. I felt myself at the beginning of a journey into his past, a journey planned by mysterious agents. As a child, carried asleep aboard a midnight train, becomes conscious of enormous, purposeful movement in the dark, of acceleration backward rather than forward, away from the probes of light that penetrate and flicker around the walls of his new, gently rocking room.
The author proceeds to sketch his own origins as a child of privilege, born in Chicago on August 9th, 1912, 18 months after Ronald Reagan, who was still living in the house with tall windows in Tampico. Their worlds, though close and contemporary, could not be more different. E., as we may call the author's earlier self, is the scion of the Chicago meatpacking dynasty Morris and Company. He is half English on his mother's side. A few years after his birth, Morris and Company will be merged into the Swift and Armour conglomerate, and his father will acquire a large fortune, only to dispense most of it in philanthropy. As an upcoming chapter will show, Ronald Reagan is destined to live briefly in Chicago in the year 1915, so he and his future biographer unwittingly move within 80 blocks of each other. There will be several instances when they again drift close, because E. spends many childhood summers at a farm in Aurora, about 40 miles west of the Windy City, while young Dutch's restless, shoe salesman father moves his family from town to town in the immediate vicinity of north-central Illinois. Author and subject will not actually meet until Dutch is living in Dixon in the late fall of 1926. And even then, it is only E who is aware of the encounter. Throughout this book, Ronald Reagan's extreme short-sightedness, which was to disqualify him from active service in World War II, is emphasized by the author, as is the characteristic self-distancing of a benign but aloof personality. Dutch, the text makes plain, was a boy apart, as he later became a man apart. Always cheerful, sociable even, but somehow private in the midst of the busiest crowd. What E calls his massive self-sufficiency caused him to regard everybody around him, with the exception of 4 successive, short, forceful, brown-eyed women, in the same neutral, kindly, undiscriminating light. Hence, it is not surprising he never pays attention to E, if indeed he ever sees him. The reader of Dutch or Memoir will notice that Reagan is almost always without spectacles when author and subject draw near.